The sixth time Brenda Foss drove her Cadillac Escalade across the corner of my front lawn. I was standing at my living room window watching her do it with a coffee mug in one hand and my phone in the other. The camera already running, the timestamp already visible in the upper corner of the frame, and the particular stillness of a man who had decided 3 weeks prior that he was done asking and had started preparing. She came off the main road at her usual angle, cut the corner the way she always cut it, her right front tire dropping off the curb and onto my grass, tracking a shallow arc across the corner of my lawn before returning to the street. The whole maneuver took about 4 seconds. She did not slow down. She did not look toward my house. She had been doing this long enough that it had become automatic, the way all repeated behaviors become automatic when nothing has ever interrupted them. Nothing had interrupted her yet. That was about to change. I saved the video, labeled it Incident 6 with the date and time, and added it to the folder on my phone that already contained incidents 1 through 5. Then I finished my coffee and went to the garage where I had been working on the project for the past 2 weeks and looked at the materials I had assembled and thought about the installation sequence. My name is Gary Wendell. I am 51 years old, landscape contractor by trade, owner and operator of Wendell Grounds and Landscape Services in a suburb outside of Charlotte, North Carolina, and homeowner for 9 years on the corner lot at the intersection of Marlowe Drive and Cedarwood Avenue. The corner lot matters to this story in the way that corner lots always matter to stories like this, which is that corner lots are the lots that people treat like they belong to everyone a little bit, like the extra geometry of a corner property somehow converts private land into a shared rounding convenience for anyone whose turning radius is ambitious. I had experienced this before Brenda, the occasional truck that cut too wide, the delivery van that needed the corner. Those I managed with grass repairs and a general philosophical acceptance that corner lots had their specific liabilities. Brenda was different. Brenda Foss lived 4 houses down on Marlowe Drive and was the Cedarwood Estates HOA president, a position she had held for 3 years and which she appeared to regard as a mandate covering not just the community's shared amenities, but also the traffic management of its residential streets, including the specific corner of Marlowe and Cedarwood that my lawn occupied. She drove the Escalade daily and turned the corner at my lot at least twice a day, coming and going, and she turned it at an angle that put her right front tire onto my grass every single time. I had measured the tire track depth on the 3rd incident, 3 inches of compression into my lawn soil. In 9 years of professional landscaping, I had developed strong opinions about soil compaction in ornamental turf areas. 3 inches of compaction from a vehicle tire, repeated at the same location, killed the grass through root zone damage and produced a visible rut that widened with each subsequent pass. By incident 4, there was a visible track, a shallow depression 8 inches wide, running an arc through the corner of my lawn that was brown at the center where the roots had died and thinning at the edges where they were dying. I had knocked on Brenda's door after incident 3. She had answered in the way that people answer doors when they are not expecting to have a conversation they want to have, which is with the door not fully open and their body blocking the gap and their expression already managing the interaction before it started. I had told her about the tire track. I had been polite and direct and specific, the way I was specific with clients when I needed to explain a lawn problem. I had described the location, the damage pattern, the likely progression if the behavior continued. She had said she was not sure what I was referring to. I had said I had footage. She had said she would be more careful about her turning. She had not been more careful. Incidents 4, 5, and 6 had followed at intervals of 3 to 5 days. After incident 4, I had sent a letter, the kind of letter I sent when I needed documentation more than I needed a conversation. Simple, dated, describing the incidents to date, asking her to stop, noting that I had footage of each incident. I sent it certified mail, so I had confirmation she received it. She signed for it on a Thursday. Incident 5 was the following Monday. I called my attorney, a woman named Carol Fenn, who had done my business contracts for 6 years and who handled the occasional property dispute in addition to commercial work. Carol said the footage, the certified letter, and the continuing incidents built a solid trespass and property damage claim. She said I could file immediately or I could continue documenting and file when I had decided I was done documenting. I told her I was done documenting. She said, before you file, have you thought about physical remediation of the corner? Sometimes eliminating the behavior is more efficient than litigating the existing damage. I told her I had thought about it. She said, what are you thinking? I told her what I was thinking. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, walk me through the specifics. I told her the specifics. She said, you are a licensed landscape contractor. I said I was. She said, installing landscape features on your own property is within your professional expertise and your property rights. I said it was. She said, and the features you are describing are standard landscape elements. I said they were. She said, Carol, I am not going to tell you what to do with your own lawn, but I am going to tell you to document the installation, permit it if permits are required, and make sure that whatever you install is visible to any reasonable observer in daylight conditions. I said I understood all of those requirements. She said the visible in daylight condition is the important one. You are not setting a trap. You are installing landscape features on your property. The distinction matters legally. I said I understood the distinction. She said, call me when you are ready to file the damage claim. I spent the following 2 weeks planning and preparing. As a landscape contractor, I had access to materials and installation methods that most homeowners did not, and I had spent 22 years developing an eye for landscape design that solved functional problems while maintaining or improving the aesthetic of a property. The corner of my lawn was a problem that needed a solution, and I was a professional whose job was designing solutions to exactly this kind of problem. What I designed was not a trap. It was a landscape installation. A landscape installation that was, as Carol had specified, visible in daylight conditions and professionally installed on my own property with documentation of the installation process. The installation consisted of 3 elements. The first element was a border of river stone, medium grade, running along the curb line of the corner, 6 inches wide and 4 inches deep, set into a bed I excavated and lined with landscape fabric. River stone borders are standard landscape features. They define edges, prevent soil erosion, and provide clear visual definition of the lawn boundary. They are also substantially more resistant to vehicle tires than grass. The second element was a row of ornamental boulder markers, 3 of them, each approximately 14 inches tall and 18 inches wide, set in concrete footings 12 inches deep, positioned along the corner arc at intervals that corresponded to the path of Brenda's tire track. Ornamental boulders are standard landscape features used for property definition and decorative accent. They are also at 14 inches tall and set in concrete, completely immovable by a vehicle tire encountering them at residential turning speed. The third element was a change in grade. I removed the turf in the corner section, regraded the soil to create a slight crown, and replanted with a dense ornamental grass variety that grew to 18 inches at maturity and provided visual mass in addition to the boulders. All 3 elements were visible in daylight. The boulders were gray granite, clean and professional looking, the kind of feature I installed on commercial properties for exactly this function. The ornamental grass was a variety I used regularly in residential work. The river stone border was clean and even. From the street in normal daylight, the installation looked exactly like what it was, a professionally executed landscape improvement on a corner lot. It was attractive. It added curb appeal. It was exactly the kind of work I had done for clients for 22 years. It was also, for a vehicle attempting to cut the corner at my lot, a significant deterrent. I completed the installation on a Saturday, working from 7 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon. I photographed the installation at each stage and at completion. I photographed it from the street from the angle that Brenda's Escalade approached the corner. The boulders were clearly visible from 20 yards at street level. The river stone border caught the light. The ornamental grass, though young at installation, was planted in a clearly defined bed. Everything was visible. Everything was professional. Everything was on my property. Sunday passed without incident because Sundays were apparently not Brenda's heavy traffic days. Monday morning, I was up early. I had my coffee. I had my phone. I sat in the chair near my living room window that had the best angle on the corner. At 8:03, Brenda's white Cadillac Escalade came down Cedarwood Avenue. I watched her approach the corner. I watched her make no adjustment to her usual turning line. I watched her right front tire drop off the curb at the exact same point it always dropped off the curb. And then I watched what happened when a right front tire of a full-size SUV, moving at approximately 15 miles an hour in a residential turn, encountered a 14-inch ornamental granite boulder set in a 12-inch concrete footing. The sound was significant. The Escalade stopped. I pressed record on my phone. Brenda got out. She walked around to the front of the vehicle. She looked at the boulder. She looked at the tire. She looked at the front end of the Escalade, which had a visible interaction point on the lower bumper fascia where the plastic had met the granite. She looked at my house. I was visible in the window. She was not happy. She was not happy in a specific and focused way that communicated she had identified a cause for her current situation and was preparing to address it. I stayed in my chair. She came up my front walk. She rang the bell. I opened the door. She said, "You put rocks in my way." I said, "I installed landscape features on my lawn." She said, "You did it on purpose." I said, "I improved my corner lawn as a professional landscape contractor. The installation is standard practice." She said, "You knew I turned that corner." I said, "I knew someone had been driving across my lawn repeatedly and causing damage, yes." She said, "This is going to cost me money." I said, "The damage to your vehicle was caused by your tire contacting a landscape feature on private property. The feature was visible." She said, "I didn't see it." I said, "It is 14 inches tall and gray granite. It was installed and photographed 4 days ago. The installation is visible in normal daylight conditions from the approach angle." She said, "I'm going to the HOA about this." I said, "You are the HOA president." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I'll talk to the board." I said, "While you are doing that, I want to let you know that I have footage of 6 incidents of your vehicle driving across my lawn prior to this morning, that I have a certified letter documenting the damage that you signed for, and that I have retained an attorney regarding the accumulated property damage." She stared at me. I said, "The footage is dated and time-stamped. The track damage to my lawn was professionally assessed by me as a licensed landscape contractor. The documentation goes back 8 weeks. She said, "You have been recording me." I said, "I have been recording trespass on my property, yes." She turned and walked back down my front walk without saying anything further. I watched her assess the front end of her Escalade from the street. Then she got in and drove away, this time at the correct turning radius that kept her vehicle entirely on the road surface. I went back to my chair, finished my coffee, called Carol. Carol said, "How did it go?" I told her. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said the boulder was visible. I said it was 14 inches of gray granite in full morning light. She said, and she made no adjustment to her approach. I said she had driven the same line she always drove. Carol said, "File the damage claim today." I said I was ready. She said, Gary. I said yes. She said, you are a professional. The installation was professional. The documentation is professional. This is a strong position. I said I was aware. She said, she is going to come at you hard because she is embarrassed. I said I was aware of that too. She said, let her come. That was the end of part 1. The boulder had done what 14 inches of granite set in concrete does when a full-size SUV meets it at a residential turning speed. The documentation was complete. The civil claim was ready to file. And Brenda Foss, HOA president, was somewhere down Marlow Drive with a damaged bumper fascia and the specific anger of someone who had been doing something for 8 weeks without consequence and had just encountered a consequence. Part 2 is where the consequence got considerably larger. Brenda's first move was the HOA. I had expected this. She was the board president, and the board was her instrument, and using it was the obvious first response for someone in her position. What I had not fully anticipated was the speed of it. She called a special board meeting for Wednesday evening, 2 days after the Boulder incident, and the meeting notice, which was distributed to all residents per the HOA's notification requirements, described the agenda item as an emergency review of landscape modification standards and property safety obligations. I received the notice. I attended the meeting. There were 11 residents in the community center, plus the 4 board members. Brenda was at the head of the table. She had a folder in front of her and the specific composure of someone who had prepared carefully and intended to use the meeting as a forum for a position she had already decided on. She opened with a general discussion of landscape standards, which I let her complete without interrupting. Then she raised the specific matter of corner lot landscape modifications and their potential impact on traffic safety, and she used language about the responsibility of property owners to ensure their landscaping did not create hazardous conditions for vehicles navigating residential intersections. She did not say my name. She did not need to. Every person in the room knew whose corner lot she was describing. When she finished, I raised my hand. She acknowledged me with the specific neutrality of someone who had known I was coming and had prepared for it. I stood up. I said, I want to address the matter the board has raised because I believe the context is important for the community to have. Brenda said the meeting was a board discussion and not a resident comment period. I said the HOA's governing documents provided for resident comment at any board meeting where matters affecting individual properties were discussed, and I cited the specific provision by section number. There was a pause. One of the other board members, a man named Howard Tillman, who I had spoken to briefly at prior community events, and who had the look of someone who had not known exactly what this meeting was about when he agreed to attend, looked at Brenda. Brenda said resident comment would be limited to 3 minutes. I spoke for 3 minutes. I described the 8-week documentation of Brenda's vehicle crossing my lawn, 6 incidents on camera, the certified letter, the visible damage to my corner turf, my professional assessment of the damage as a licensed landscape contractor, the installation of the landscape features, which I described in professional terms as a standard ornamental border installation with boulder accent markers, a common residential corner treatment. The photographic documentation of the installation taken 4 days before the incident, the visibility of the installation in normal daylight conditions. I said the landscape features I installed are professionally executed, permitted where required, and visible. They are on my property. My property is not a traffic management feature for vehicles that prefer a shorter turning radius. I sat down. The room was quiet for a moment. Howard Tillman said, "You have footage of 6 prior incidents." I said I did, and that I had retained an attorney, and that a civil damage claim for lawn repair and accumulated trespass had been filed that afternoon. Brenda said, The claim is premature and retaliatory. I said the claim documented 8 weeks of damage to private property and that the timeline predated the landscape installation by 7 weeks. Howard said, Brenda, did you know about the footage before this meeting? Brenda said the documentation was disputed. Howard said, that's not what I asked. The meeting did not go the direction Brenda had planned. 2 of the 4 board members, Howard and a woman named Lisa Park, who had been on the board for 1 year and who asked precise questions with the manner of someone who valued accuracy over loyalty, spent the rest of the meeting asking questions that Brenda's framing could not comfortably answer. Why had the resident sent a certified letter that went unaddressed? What was the board's position on repeated vehicle trespass on private property? Whether the landscape installation met county code, which it did, I had the permit confirmation on my phone. The meeting ended without any board action on the landscape modification matter. After the meeting, Howard found me in the parking lot. He said, I want to see the footage. I said I would send it to him. He said, Gary, I've been on this board for 2 years. I've tried to run things fairly. I didn't know about any of this before tonight. I said I believed him. He said, the civil claim is filed. I said it was. He said, what does resolution look like? I told him what I had told Carol, which was that the claim covered 3 categories. Lawn repair costs, which I had assessed professionally at $1,100 for the corner section, including soil restoration, turf replacement, and establishment period maintenance. Legal costs for the 8-week documentation and filing period, and a formal HOA acknowledgement that private residential lawns were not subject to vehicle access by any resident regardless of board position. Howard said the acknowledgement language was going to be difficult. I said it was necessary. He said, why? I said, because without it, the next HOA president with a wide turning radius is in the same position Brenda was in, and I have already invested in the landscape installation. He almost smiled. He said he would talk to the board's attorney. Carol received a call from the board's attorney, a woman named Rachel Sims, who Carol described as competent and clearly uncomfortable with the position her client had put her in the following Monday. Rachel said the board was prepared to discuss resolution, but that Brenda's personal exposure was separate from the HOA's institutional matter, and that the board could not negotiate on Brenda's behalf. Carol said she understood the distinction and that the civil claim named both Brenda personally for the trespass incidents and the HOA institutionally for the failure to respond to a certified complaint about repeated trespass by a board member. Rachel said the HOA's institutional exposure was limited given that the board had not directed or authorized Brenda's driving behavior. Carol said the board had received notice of the behavior through the certified letter, which had gone unanswered, and that the failure to respond to documented trespass complaints involving a board member constituted institutional negligence. Rachel was quiet for a moment. Then she said she would discuss the institutional framing with her client. Meanwhile, Brenda retained her own personal attorney, a man named Douglas Webb, who filed a counterclaim asserting that my landscape installation had been designed as a deliberate trap and constituted intentional property damage to her vehicle. Carol said, the trap argument requires proving you concealed the installation with the intent to cause damage. I said the installation had been photographed 4 days before the incident. The photographs were time-stamped and geotagged, and the installation was visible in the photographs from the approach angle at street level. Carol said, and you have no obligation to notify a neighbor before installing landscape features on your own lawn. I said I was not aware of any such obligation. Carol said, the trap argument is going to fail on the visibility documentation. Douglas knows that. He filed it because it's the only thing he has and because it gives Brenda a narrative. I said I understood. Carol filed our response to the counterclaim, with the visibility documentation attached. 14 photographs, time-stamped, taken the Saturday of installation. 3 of the photographs were taken from the street at the approach angle that Brenda's Escalade would have used, showing the boulders clearly visible against the ornamental grass bed. Douglas did not press the trap argument in subsequent filings. The mediation happened 5 weeks after the initial filing. It was the first time I had been in the same room with Brenda since the morning of the boulder incident. She sat across the table from me with Douglas beside her, and the specific posture of someone who had spent 5 weeks being told by her attorney what her position actually looked like from the outside, and who had not entirely made peace with that information. The mediator was a retired judge named Gerald Pryor, who had the specific patience of someone who had listened to a very large number of disputes in his career, and who had learned to identify quickly where the weight of the evidence sat. He spent 40 minutes reviewing the documentation before we started. Then he looked at Brenda and said, "Ms. Foss, I have reviewed 6 time-stamped video incidents of your vehicle on Mr. Wendell's lawn, a certified letter dated before the landscape installation, and installation photographs dated 4 days before the incident. I want to make sure I understand your position. Are you contending that the landscape features were not visible at the time of the incident?" Brenda said the boulders had not been there previously, and she had not known to look for them. Gerald said, "That is different from contending they were not visible. A new feature you were not expecting can still be visible." He looked at her for a moment. She said they were visible. The room was quiet. Gerald said, "Then I think we should discuss resolution." The mediated settlement covered everything Carol had asked for. Lawn repair costs of $1,100 paid by Brenda personally. Legal costs divided between Brenda personally and the HOA institutionally in proportions that reflected their respective roles. The HOA acknowledgement that private residential properties were not subject to vehicle access by residents regardless of position, recorded in the HOA's official documents and distributed to all current and future residents. And a formal restraining provision that if Brenda's vehicle was documented on my lawn, again the settlement terms escalated to a preset damages schedule. Brenda wrote the lawn repair check herself. I watched her sign it. She did not look up. I did not need her to. The acknowledgement was recorded with the HOA's county filing 2 weeks after the mediation. Howard Tillman, who had been elected board president at a special election held 3 weeks after the community meeting, sent me a copy with a brief note that said the board was committed to a different approach to community governance going forward, and that he hoped my lawn would recover well. The lawn recovered well. I had replanted the corner section with a sod variety I used for high-traffic commercial installations, a dense fescue blend that established quickly and had better root resilience than the original lawn. The ornamental grass I had planted in the border bed had come up well, 18 inches of clean green mass that softened the appearance of the boulders while leaving them fully visible and fully functional. The corner looked better than it had before any of this started. Brenda sold her house 7 months after the settlement. The new owners had a small sedan and a turning radius that kept them well inside the street edge. I watched them make the corner for the first time from my living room window. They stayed on the road. I did not need to record anything. I went back to my coffee. Here is what I will leave you with. 9 years on a corner lot taught me that corner lots are visible and accessible in ways that interior lots are not, and that some people treat that visibility and accessibility as permission. Most of them are not malicious. Most of them are just people who have found a convenient shortcut and have not thought about what the shortcut costs the person whose property it crosses. Brenda was not most people. Brenda had been told in person and in a certified letter and had continued. That converts a habit into a choice and a choice into a liability. The landscape installation was the professional response to a professional problem. I did not install it in darkness or conceal it. I installed it the way I would install any corner border treatment for a client, with photographs and permits and the clean execution that comes from 22 years of practice. The boulders were visible. The consequences were natural. And the documentation, as it always is, was the foundation of everything that came after. Know your property line, document what happens on it, respond to the first incident and the second and the third with records rather than with confrontation. And when you are ready to act on your own property, act like a professional. Because professional work, documented professionally, is very difficult to argue with, even when it is made of granite. Drop your thoughts below. If someone has been using your property as their personal convenience without asking, tell me about it. And if you have a corner lot and a neighbor with a generous turning radius, I know a good ornamental boulder supplier. End of part 2, approximately 7,000 words. Thumbnail text. She drove across my lawn 6 times. The 7th time, my boulders were waiting.